Hi, my name is Dennis Crowley. I am co-founder of the technology company Foursquare. Um, I've also done a bunch of other random startups. I had a company called Dodgeball that we sold to Google way back in the day. I started a semi-pro soccer team up in the Hudson Valley of New York. I'm currently working on another soccer-related startup, like an app that makes pickup games. Um, and so, I kind of position myself as I'm just someone that likes to build things that bring people together.
So, would you consider yourself a serial entrepreneur?
No, you know why? Because I kind of stay away from the term entrepreneur because I feel like, at least in my head, like entrepreneur is making businesses for the sake of making businesses, right? Like I just want to make a business. I don't care what the business does. I just want to make a business. And I feel like all the stuff that I've ever worked on has been, I have this idea and I can't get out of my head, and I don't know if it's a good idea or not. And I don't know if it's like an art project or a product or a company, but I'm just going to make this thing. And so I get myself on these like journeys where I have this idea for something I want to make. I can't get out of my head, and then I just work and make those things. And that's I don't know. I've just kind of followed that path, and that's worked out pretty good for me so far.
So, like dodgeball, which was early on in your career, you had just graduated what from NYU, is that right?
Yeah, it was like our thesis project at NYU.
And what was the thesis? What was the idea at that time?
Yeah, well, this is like 2000, 2002 to 2004 when cell phones were brand new, and the idea of like having internet on your phone was brand new. And so our thesis was like an exploration of what happens at the intersection of like social software, mobile devices, and location-based services. So if your phone knows where you are and the phone knows who all your friends are, you should be able to meet up with all your friends, right? And so that's what we built. But like we built it before the iPhone, and we built it before apps on phones. And so it was all this text messaging based, and but it worked, right? It was like the crappiest version of a like friend finder tool that you could imagine, but it was effective at getting its point across. And because it was new, people wanted to use it.
When you when did you have the idea that concept, right? Because I know, having known you for as long as I do, I know that concept is always very interesting to you, right? It's like this marriage of the physical space and sort of like, when did you think that could be a company? And like, how did you actually think about starting a company? Because like that's a big step at that point. Like there isn't a lot of prior art at that point in terms of like starting companies, right?
Yeah, that's a great question because we were coming out of art school. Like I wasn't in business school; I was in art school. Exploring kind of the intersection of art and technology. And so this was it was a thesis. It was like an exploration of what you could do with software. But then around the time that we were graduating, my co-founder and I, we were looking for other jobs. I was going to go take a job at MTV, and he was going to go take a job at Razorfish. And then a couple blogs started writing about our thesis project, and then the New York Times wrote an article, and other people started talking about it. And I was like, maybe we should not get jobs. Maybe we should do this. Maybe this is supposed to be our job. And so we went out and we tried to raise money for it. Like we didn't know what we were doing, but like we went out and talked to people, talked to investors, and we didn't really have much luck.
How did you find those investors to talk to in the first place? Because you weren't Dennis Crowley then; you were just Dennis Crowley.
I, I was an NYU student eating ramen and pizza every day. I basically lived at the computer lab at NYU. Um, like we had advisors. Like you have a thesis advisor. You have instructors or professors that were connected to investors. And when they're like, "Hey, the New York Times read about your thesis project. You should go talk to someone about this." And so we had access to this, but like the classic thing that you hear in venture is like, "Oh, this is a great idea. Like go find a lead investor, and then we'll come along." And I'm like, "Well, I don't know how to do that. I don't even know what that is." And so we just, instead of spending our time chasing fundraising, we just like kind of got back to work. I'm like, I don't even know how to do this, so I'm just going to continue to build and continue to build. And what happened is like we ended up getting on like the conference circuit. Like as a coming out of grad school, like you get invited to speak at conferences. So we speak at conferences about like, here's what we built, and here's our thesis, and here's why it's interesting, and here's what it looks like in the wild. And one of these conferences, there were some people from Google in the audience, and they wanted to hear more, and that started this conversation that we had with Google that ultimately ended up in our thesis project being acquired by newly IPO'd Google, and so we went and worked there for a couple of years, which is well, it was awesome and amazing.
Then you had a good run at Google, and then you kind of still had this itch, though, right? Like what was the itch? Like, how did you? I'm guessing that the dream that you had that was your thesis wasn't realized at your time at Google, and there was still an itch to scratch.
We wanted to bring the dodgeball to millions of people. I don't think we ever realized the full potential of the product or what the product would grow into be. And so, we kind of had this core understanding of the data assets that Dodgeball was generating. Like, listen, if you could build a machine that like understood where people were all the time, and then you did that across, tens of thousands or millions of people, you'd have lots of interesting data. Like you'd make a living, breathing map of the world. And so, ultimately, like when the Dodgeball project was retired at Google, we kind of knew that like that has to live on. Like you have to take that core nugget of what's interesting about it and bring it somewhere else, so you can work on it. And at the time, like, we had just left Google. I felt kind of like a failed entrepreneur. Like I had this thing, it kind of worked, got bought, but now it's not around anymore. Or just like let's just build it again. Let's build the same thing again, but like we know so much more now. Like social networks are mainstream. The iPhone is out. People know what apps are. Like before, we had to like explain everything. Like explain, okay, you have GPS, you have a phone, you have an app, and then, I mean, it was just a mouthful of stuff to explain. And then by the time that we started Foursquare, like a lot of that stuff was just kind of there. People understood how to use their phones that way, and that was a big advantage for us.
How did you have the conviction to leave Google? Because my guess is that Google was flourishing at that time, right? So it was a pretty challenging financial decision for you to leave Google, right? Or did you not even think about that?
We didn't really think about it. It was more. We had the thing that we loved working on, which was a dodgeball project. Like this piece of software that brings people together, and like we weren't able to work on that anymore. They wanted to move us on to different projects. And I was like, I don't want to work on anything else. I want to work on this. And so, we left, and it took me about like a year, maybe a year, to kind of get over the fact that, hey, we left this project behind, and we had worked on this project for 5 years, and that's a real bummer. I was kind of in like a dark place for like a year, before I just kind of had the epiphany. This sounds so obvious, but like it wasn't at the time. Like, just if that's what I want to do, just go make the same thing again. Just try it again, and that's it. That's just what we did. We sat down and tried it again. Now, when we went with the early version of Foursquare and we pitched it to venture people, the VCs, people like, you already built this. Like you already sold this company, right? Google didn't want it. Like why would we invest in it again? And I kept telling people like it's different now. The world is different. Phones are different. Like people's understanding of what you can do with phones and social networks and all that's different. And so the timing just wasn't right. Like in hindsight, like you can look at it and be, oh, the timing just wasn't right. But in that moment, people were like, why are you doing the same thing again? Go do something else. And so that was really tough. But like we felt so strongly about what the product would be capable of doing if it was built the right way, that like there was really nothing else we wanted to do.
Along that ride where there's many people doubting you and saying, like, why are you doing this? Like, who were the people that you were able to kind of get you through that? I assume your co-founder, right, was key to that. But like, were there other people? And I guess knowing a little bit about your experience as a co-founder, um, explain to me like how important that relationship was and is, and maybe what are some of the other relationships that were able to get you through back to the idea of starting the same thing over again at that time.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, remember there was a lot of people that, I mean, not a lot. I mean, it was tens of thousands of people that were using Dodgeball at the time, and there wasn't really like a New York tech ecosystem. I mean, there was New York tech, but it wasn't like New York tech today. You know, but there was like a small group of people that were doing interesting things on with mobile phones in New York, and we had some like notoriety within that group because like I'd known that group for a long time. Like we're the guys that made Dodgeball, we're the ones that sold it to Google. Like that gave us some notoriety. And so when we said that, like, hey, we're gonna build it again, like people, like they cheered us on. Like the people in New York cheered us on. The venture people were like, "What are you guys crazy? Go do something else." But like our friends are like, "Yeah, if dodgeball's gonna get turned off, go make another one." If uh and if you're going to make another one, I want to work on it. Like I want to help. And that's kind of what we needed. Like we didn't know people. Naveen, my co-founder, was the original iOS engineer, but like I'm not a great engineer. I can hack stuff together that breaks after like a week. But we were able to pull from our group of friends and like our group of like colleagues and professional acquaintances. When people heard that we were doing another thing, they're like, I want in. Like, sign me up. And I think Foursquare got to like, I think we hired like 20 or 22 people before we hired someone that we didn't know personally, like before we brought the first like outsider into it. And like, it was like this, secret like advantage or superpower that we had in the early days. Like we just knew all these people that like were really good at mobile, were really hungry to do something with mobile. And like, they wanted to work with us personally. And that really helped us.